Week number 4 of the NFL season is officially in the books, so in today's video, let's give my honest thoughts and reaction to every single game of week number 4. So as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about week number 4 of the NFL season. Unfortunately, because I am recording this on a Sunday night, I cannot talk about the 2 Monday Night Football games between the Titans and Dolphins and the Seahawks and Lions. So if you guys are curious about my opinions on both those games, I will have a post for each separate game in my community tab, so just check that out after those games. And with that being said, we are going to begin with the Thursday Night Football game, and then we're going to go in order of each game, finishing off with the Bills versus the Ravens game. With that all said, if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's begin. And as I mentioned, we are going to begin with the Thursday night matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants, a game in which the Dallas Cowboys won in not so beautiful fashion. Typically, when the Dallas Cowboys go up against a team like the New York Giants, they typically blow them out. I think Dallas has won with Dak Prescott like almost every single one of their matchups, and this one was a lot of the similar things that you kind of came to expect from this game. Dallas was able to methodically move the ball down the field whenever they really wanted to, whereas the Giants could move the ball, but they weren't able to score touchdowns. I will say I think this is arguably the best game that Daniel Jones has played in quite some time, which I don't really know is that much of a good thing because Dallas's secondary was killed with injuries, but I'll give Daniel Jones a little bit of credit. I thought he had a fine game, just not a great game. From the perspective of the Giants, listen, your run game is non-existent, but your offensive line has looked somewhat better, and Malik Neighbors is probably the best rookie in the entire rookie class so far. And I think there's some positives you can take away from a game like this one, where you went up against the Cowboys team that is currently struggling, but you still kept yourself in the game and had a chance to win it late. Whereas for the Cowboys, there's a lot of things wrong with this Cowboys team. They cannot run the ball effectively on offense. They don't really put themselves in situations to effectively run the ball. And outside of CeeDee Lamb, the weapons offensively are so scarce and really non-existent again outside of CeeDee Lamb. And defensively, Micah Parsons was carted off the field. DeMarcus Lawrence is out for a couple weeks, and your secondary is bruised with injuries. And this is possibly the worst time for injuries to stack up for this Cowboys team because the rest of their schedule is about to get really difficult. So for the Dallas Cowboys, I wish you luck. And then let's move on to our Sunday noon game, starting off with the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Carolina Panthers. Coming into this game, Carolina obviously had a little bit of momentum from last week's victory, where they were able to get a lot of offensive points, were able to put some numbers up on the board against a bad Raiders team, but regardless, a win is a win. And I kind of expected them to play better in this game, and for the most part, they did. Andy Dalton made some mistakes, but he was still much better than what we've seen from Bryce Young. There actually was a decent run game from Chuba Hubbard, who actually got himself going in this one. Miles Sanders also had a couple of good runs too, which was nice to see. And when it comes to the receiving core, Deontay Johnson led the way. I think Deontay Johnson and Andy Dalton have looked really good together, so I don't foresee a chance that Bryce Young's going to play within the next couple weeks unless Andy Dalton just kind of falls back down to earth. And then, of course, Cincinnati side of things, you took care of business against a really bad Carolina Panthers team. In an ideal world, you would obviously prefer to blow this team out like 34-0, but that's a really hard thing to do when you're going up against a competent team. At least right now, it looks like Carolina's a little bit more competent than they were in weeks 1 and 2. Joe Burrow looked okay. He did have an interception on the day, but he was able to methodically move the ball down the field and was able to get some big chunk plays with Jamar Chase. This is at least a good step in the right direction for the Cincinnati Bengals, but there's still a lot of things that have to be figured out before this team is actually, at least in my opinion, anything close to a playoff contender. And then we have our NFC South showdown between the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints, a game that went all the way down to a game-winning field goal from the Atlanta Falcons. And I think the best way to describe this game for the New Orleans Saints was just really bad missed opportunities. This was a game where they were able to outgain the Atlanta Falcons by over 50 yards. They ran the ball effectively. They were able to convert a lot of their third downs. I think they converted 7 of 13, I think they said at one point. But the issues for them is they had some really costly penalties, especially late when they were trying to make a game-winning drive, or at least the Falcons were. And they also had a fumble lost and an interception, which were both killers for both those drives because it looked like they were potentially going to get some points on some of those possessions. And this is back-to-back weeks coming off of what seemed to be a really good start for this team, where you've kind of come back down to earth. I think the offense looked better in this week, but again, it just hasn't looked the same as it did in weeks 1 and 2. I will say the offense is clearly better than what it was last year, but it looks like it's kind of come back down to earth a tad bit. Alvin Kamara still playing good football. Chris Olave got the ball, 8 receptions for 87 107 yards, which is really good for Chris Olave. So it's kind of hard to figure out where this Saints team really is. Are they a top 10 team? Are they the same team that dominated Dallas and Carolina? Or is this who they really are? And then there's the Atlanta Falcons side of things here. Listen, to be honest with you, you got a little bit lucky in this one, where you had a muffed fumble where you're able to get some points from that, as well as you had the interception and you were able to go down the field and get a pass interference on that last drive to ultimately win the game. I don't want to take anything away from the Atlanta Falcons in this one because they did play a decent game, but if the Saints don't make those mistakes, I do think the Saints win this one. So I don't really know how to feel quite yet about Atlanta because I feel like both their victories are a little bit lucky, but again, a win is a win. Then we have the Houston Texans going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Early on in this game, the Jaguars were getting a lot of big breaks. Things were really going their way, and then things started to kind of fall back down to earth, which is seemingly a bit of a theme from this week so far. This was, in theory, a must-win game for this Jaguars team because if you lose this game, you go 0-4 and your chances of making the playoffs are damn near zero. Whereas if you win this game, you at least give yourself a chance to go on a bit of a run and potentially win some more games to get yourself in that wild card position. But of course, they lost a game, and they lost a game in which I thought they played better for the most part of the game. Not to say they outplayed the Texans for the majority of the game, but I felt like early on they outplayed them, and then a little bit later in the game, they made some plays to outplay the Houston Texans. But ultimately, when it mattered most, Houston was able to make the right plays when they needed to. CJ Stroud had a solid game. I don't think CJ's looked great thus far through the season, but he's looked really good. He was 27 for 40 for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. No interceptions, which is always a good thing from CJ Stroud. Whenever this Texans team doesn't turn the ball over, it's really hard to beat them. I think this is a building step for Jacksonville. They're clearly not in the same space they used to be when they were a playoff contender, but this is at least a game in which you were able to stay competitive against a really good Texans team, so hopefully they can build off of this and kind of finish the year off strong. Whereas for the Houston side of things, I do think that this team has some issues, and I just can't quite yet put my finger on what the issue is. It just feels like the offense at times stalls out really quickly, so I'm kind of trying to figure out what's going on there. They're still 3-1, so there's plenty of time to figure this stuff out. I don't know right now if they're Super Bowl contenders, but they're clearly in a good position to put themselves in that category. And then we had a fist fight, a really odd game between the New York Jets and the Denver Broncos. The final score was 10-9. Now, in defense of the New York Jets for losing this one, the rain conditions did not help them, and the Broncos defense played out of this world. But at the same time, you lost a game where your defense held the opposing team to 10 points, and their starting quarterback at one point, I think halfway through the second quarter, had like -7 yards on like 15 passes, which is ridiculous. Bo Nix at the end of the day didn't look good in this game, but he looked a whole lot better in that second half, a lot more comfortable, but still not good. On the day, he was 12 for 25 for 60 yards and 1 touchdown. Not a good game, but it was obviously good enough to win this one. This was a game of really sloppy play, terrible decision making, bad offensive playmaking. If you're a Jets fan, you got to feel sick to your stomach because you were able to outgain the Broncos by over 60 yards. The Broncos had 60 total passing yards, whereas you guys had 184. But a fumble loss doesn't help you. 13 penalties for 90 yards doesn't help you. And Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson and his receivers just not being on the same page doesn't help you either. This is in my opinion, really bad loss for the Jets, especially because they're a team that wants to make the playoffs and wants to make a deep run. But losing to a team like the Broncos, who had a terrible day, is really tough to see. And for the Broncos side of things, I don't think there's anything to write home about. You won a very sloppy and very ugly game, but you found a way to win a game where you had 60 passing yards, so you have to feel good about your defense. Again, this was a weird one, weather conditions, a lot of ugly play, but hey, you got the job done. Then we had the NFC North matchup between the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota came into this game on a 3-game winning streak, beating some really good football teams. And here they were with a matchup against the fully healthy Jordan Love-led Green Bay Packers team. And early on, they put an absolute ass kicking. I think it was 28-0 or 28-7 at one point in this game. Sam Darnold was playing really good football. Justin Jefferson had a clean catch where a receiver, where a corner was covering him cleanly. That was a really nasty play. Run game was playing pretty well. Everything was smooth sailing. And then all of a sudden, Green Bay started going on a heater. Jordan Love started to actually play good. And all of a sudden, it became a ball game. But ultimately, Minnesota was able to finish this game out. I don't think the final score is really indicative of how good either of these teams are, because I think Minnesota clearly outplayed Green Bay for 3 of the 4 quarters. Whereas I think Green Bay found their rhythm in that 4th quarter, but clearly can't can play better than what they did in the first 3 quarters. I'm not sure who's going to win the rematch that we get to see later in the season, but assuming that Minnesota and Green Bay are starting to get their strides going and still playing high level, that game could be absolutely massive for the NFC North. When it comes to the MVP, I have a hard time saying that Sam Darnold is not the MVP as of today, which is ridiculous to say. But when you look at the MVP race, Josh Allen just got his butt whooped by the Ravens, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then Sam Darnold had himself a day. Yes, he had an interception, which was really bad. He probably shouldn't have thrown that ball, but he still had a fantastic day for most of that game. And if you want to throw Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes' name in there, I can see it, but I think Sam Darnold is clearly playing better than both those guys. So yeah, Sam Darnold for MVP. And then there's the Jordan Love side of things, the Packers side of things. Listen, this was always going to be a really tough game for them to throw in a rusty, injured quarterback in Jordan Love. Playing in this game, going up against a defense that's really good, has made Brock Purdy look really bad, has made CJ Stroud look really bad, and they made Jordan Love look really bad for 3 quarters. Of course, Love did get going in that 4th quarter. They dropped 22 points. On the day, Jordan Love actually statistically played pretty well. He had like 35 fantasy football points, which, hey, I'll take it. But he also had the 3 interceptions, which were mainly in the early portion of the game. A lot of those were just some really bad reads. So the defense for the Vikings yet again has shown out. I think that they would ideally like to play better late into that 4th quarter to, continue like shutting out teams. But that one was a really fun game all in all. But I don't think that these teams are quite yet at their full power. The Vikings still have some players coming back from injury, and this Packers team just has to kind of mesh a little bit longer. That rematch later in the season will be a bit more indicative of who these teams actually are and who is probably the favorite for one of the NFC North spots. And then we have the Indianapolis Colts versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, a game that was a little bit of an unexpected sort of game here because we all expected Anthony Richardson to play the majority of the game, and then he went out with an injury. Sticking to Anthony Richardson here, I thought he played fairly well early on. He made a couple of really nice throws. There was one that probably should have been picked, but it was thrown so perfectly that it wasn't. And then he got injured, came back for a play, re-injured himself again on a run play, which is a little bit bizarre. So then ultimately they would have to go to Joe Flacco, who played pretty well given the circumstances. They relied heavily on the run game with Jonathan Taylor, 21 carries for 88 yards and 1 touchdown. And when it comes to the receiving core, Michael Pittman Jr. continues to look really good. I will say for this offense, I feel like they really need to find that third option outside of Michael Pittman and Joshua Downs. I really want to see this team get Adonai Mitchell going. He was one of my favorite recruits in this past draft, so hopefully they can get him more involved in the offense moving forward. But it will definitely be interesting to see when we get Anthony Richardson back. I don't expect it to be too long. It is a hip injury, so that's always concerning, but he was out on the sideline. He came back for a play, so hopefully it's maybe 1 or 2 weeks, then he comes back. Hopefully it's even less than that. And for the Steelers side of things, it was a really bad first half, but then your offense started to play really good in the second half. I think Justin Fields is looking good. I wouldn't say he looked great in this one, especially early on, but as the game went on, he started to play a whole lot better, and that whole team played a whole lot better. Justin Fields statistically led the team in passing yards with 312 and led the team in rushing yards with 55. Ideally, Najee Harris or somebody else can get more rushing yards than your quarterback, but it is what it is. George Pickens made some incredible plays, but also had that costly fumble, which arguably could have costed the Steelers team the victory because it looked like they were going to get some points. So a little bit of an unfortunate one here. The Steelers probably should have won this game, but it was a tough one. I still don't know how to feel about the Steelers team quite yet because they haven't really beat anyone good, and they just lost to arguably their best team, but at the same time, they could have won it. So we'll have to wait and see moving forward. Then we had an NFC showdown between the struggling and brutal injuries with the LA Rams going up against the young and struggling Caleb Williams-led Chicago Bears. And in this game, it went very much how I thought it would in some ways. The Bears defense played really good. The LA Rams offense really struggled. Caleb Williams had some good moments, but a couple bad ones. Surprisingly, DeAndre Swift actually had a really solid game. I thought he wasn't going to play well because he just hasn't played well, but LA has such a bad run defense that it isn't shocking that he had 93 yards on only 16 carries. For the LA Rams, this was a game in which those 2 turnovers really hurt your team. You had a fumble and an interception. That interception by Matthew Stafford just simply can't happen from a veteran like him. I know he's a gunslinger. He wants to throw the ball across the yard, but you're a veteran, man. You can't be making those throws. Whereas I thought for Caleb Williams, he played a pretty clean game. Obviously, the offensive line still isn't very good. They had 3 sacks on the game. They also had 10 penalties for 84 yards, which of course doesn't help your young quarterback. But I thought he played a clean clean game where he didn't throw any turnovers, you know, moved around in the pocket fairly well, made some plays with his legs, throwing the ball pretty well. He did miss, I think it was DJ Moore on what would have been a touchdown, which he probably could have made that throw, but it also looked like miscommunication and just missed the spot and the timing of it. Again, I want to say that Caleb Williams is getting better each game. It's just really small steps right now. Like his week 1, abysmal. Week 2, a little bit above abysmal. Week 3, bad. Week 4, okay. So I guess this is okay now. I think we're in the okay spot, so hopefully we can start getting some good performances from Caleb as he continues to get more comfortable in the system. And then we had a really fun game, a playoff rematch between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Unfortunately, this Eagles team was killed with injuries coming into this week. Their number 1 receiver was Dallas Goedert, no AJ Brown, no Devontae Smith, had a bunch of other injuries all across the board to a bunch of key players, so they really didn't stand a chance, especially going up against a Buccaneers team that's in their stadium, wants revenge from what happened last week, and is having a really good game. Baker Mayfield played fantastic, especially in that first half. Philadelphia really struggled, especially early on. They had 0 yards through like a quarter and a half of football, which is really bad. Jalen Hurts, he played well, didn't have any interceptions. The only turnover that was caused was because of a strip sack, which Jalen really can't do a whole bunch about. It's really hard to talk about this Eagles team because they just have been killed by injuries, and it's kind of hard to tell where they're truly at until they actually get fully healthy. But I'll give them some credit. They did show some fight, mainly in that third quarter. I still just feel like this Eagles team isn't quite yet there. We shall see though, once AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and all these studs come back and they're fully healthy, what this Eagles team actually looks like, because there's some really fun matchups ahead for them. And then for the Buccaneers, listen, you dominated a really good team regardless of the injury status of all their players. You still got the job done, which is most important for you. For this Buccaneers team, you have 3 very impressive victories over the Eagles, over the Lions. Your only loss is to the Denver Broncos, which may have just been a tad bit fluky. Baker Mayfield is playing close to an MVP candidate. You're getting Bucky Irving more involved in the offense. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin still really good, and that offensive line is playing some good ball right now. So is Tampa Bay my NFC favorite? Not quite yet, but they're playing some really good ball, so we'll have to kind of keep our eyes out on that team. And then we move over to our 3 o'clock games, our afternoon games between the San Francisco 49ers and the New England Patriots. This one felt pretty obvious. San Francisco's getting a bit more healthy. Deebo Samuel played, Ayuk was still there, Jawan Jennings continues to play like an absolute stud, whereas this Patriots team just is really outgunned. If this Patriots team can't effectively run the ball for like 100+ yards, they're really going to struggle offensively, and in this game, they only had 43 yards from Ramondre Stevenson, so yeah, they struggled. It kind of does feel like on a nightly basis, Jacoby Brissett is just getting thrown out into the fire, but that's what he got paid to do. That's what he probably knew he was getting himself into. The offensive line isn't very good. They don't have any really good receiving threats, and the run game is good, but it's just not good enough, especially when the passing game is just not there. And when you're going up against a San Francisco team that isn't playing good football, but is clearly more talented than you, this is the result you're going to get. Brock Purdy continues to look really good, but he's also just making a couple bad mistakes. He had an interception that was really bad, but I thought he played some clean football throughout. By the way, that George Kittle touchdown over 3 guys, ridiculous stuff. Jordan Mason continues to play good in the absence of Christian McCaffrey. Listen, you dropped 30 points on a very good defense, so you're 2-2, but I think you're still clearly one of the favorites to win the NFC. Not a whole lot to talk about here. You beat a bad team by a good amount, so congrats. Then we had an ass kicking between the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals. I put up a poll asking you guys who you guys thought was the best team in the NFC East between Cowboys, Eagles, Giants, and Commanders, and the Commanders won that poll by a very wide margin, which tells you a lot about what people think about the young guy Jaden Daniels. On the day, they scored 42 points. That being said, they went up against a bad defense, but hey, 42 points is 42 points. Jaden Daniels played really clean football outside of that weird interception. I think that was maybe a tad bit of a miscommunication or just a missed throw. He'll be fine. That's nothing to worry about there. They ran the ball effectively. The offensive line kept Jaden Daniels clean. He only had 4 incompletions on the day. And shout out to Alamide Zacchaeus for 6 catches, 85 yards, leading the team over the likes of Terry McLaurin, so shout out to him. And then from the perspective of the Arizona Cardinals, this game felt like it was going in your direction very early on. You had a touchdown drive to open the game up. Marvin Harrison Jr. has a touchdown. Things are feeling good. And then your offense just really struggled. It got stagnant. Kyler Murray was getting pressured a lot. Run game was spotty at times, and the passing game just wasn't there. This was a game that, for if you're a Commanders fan, you got to feel ecstatic about. Hell, you dropped 42 points on a bad defense, and your defense that has been labeled bad held a really good offense to 14 points and a lot of issues. So no, I don't think the Commanders are Super Bowl contenders quite yet because they're young. They're kind of a puzzle piece of all these different pieces, and Dan Quinn is a good coach, but it's still to be determined if he's a good playoff coach. But as of right now, you are 3-1 and have some very impressive victories over the likes of a Cardinals team that is actually a good ball club, and you also beat the Cincinnati Bengals last week, and your star rookie is playing like the offensive rookie of the year, at least as of right now, so shout out to you guys. Then we had the Kansas City Chiefs versus the LA Chargers. I felt like this one was a lot more competitive than I thought it was going to be. The Chargers actually were up 10-0 early in the first quarter and throughout most of the first half. And then ultimately, your offense just really struggled for the rest of the day. They really couldn't rekindle the magic that they had in that first drive where they moved the ball down the field and hit Ladd McConkey on that crazy touchdown. And I think there's a couple reasons why. Number one, your offense really relies on the run game working, and when your best running back has only 32 yards on 14 carries, it's going to hurt your offense. You don't have the offensive weapons around Justin Herbert to seriously threaten a secondary like Kansas City. And even though this Chargers defense played a hell of a game, keeping this Chiefs offense to only 17 points, it did feel like the tide was shifting late in that third quarter to favoring a team like Kansas City. It felt like once Kansas City hit that big over-the-top touchdown to Xavier Worthy, nothing really worked for the LA Chargers after that. I'll give them credit, though, with no Derwin James, no Joey Bosa, and a plethora of other injuries. They kept this game close, so that definitely does bode well for a team like the Chargers. But for the perspective of Kansas City, this was a bad game. Let's just be honest. Yes, you're 4-0. You got a victory against a good Chargers team, but you played about as bad as you could have played, and you also had a major injury to Rashee Rice. Now, when I'm making this, it's just speculated that it's a torn ACL. It's not confirmed yet, but if it is a torn ACL, he's likely out for the season, and that's really going to hurt your offense. With that said, Kelsey had his best game of the season, but he's also, I think, like 34, 35, 36, which doesn't help your offense at all. And sure, you have Xavier Worthy, but I don't think he can play that Rashee Rice role. Maybe once Hollywood Brown gets going that he could potentially play that role, but it's still to be determined. Mahomes didn't play that good, but he also made the Mahomes plays that you expect him to make once the game is on the line late in the third, late in the fourth. He makes the right plays to get the team the win. But for a team like Kansas City, who I've had ranked number 1 on my power rankings, I expect you to play better, so they're probably going to drop down a couple spots, especially with the Rashee Rice injury. But you're still the Chiefs, you're still the defending champs, you're still, in my opinion, the team to beat. And then our last 3 o'clock game between two terrible ball clubs, the Las Vegas Raiders and the Cleveland Browns. And yeah, this game went about exactly how I thought it was going to go. It was a low-scoring affair. The final score was 20-16. Gardner Minshew was mediocre to bad, only 130 yards on 14 receptions. Deshaun Watson, I thought, played a decent game, but it wasn't a clean game. He had the interception, made a lot of mistakes, only had 176 yards on 24 receptions. Neither one of these teams are really determined to run the football. Jerome Ford only had 10 carries for 58 yards. Alexander Madison had an efficient 5 carries for 60 yards, and outside of that, there was really no other run game. This was just an ugly football game. I really don't have a whole lot to talk about from this one because it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. A lot of penalties, a lot of issues, no offense, but some good defense, a lot of sacks, a lot of pressures, a back and forth punt the ball. It was just a really bad game. But when it comes down to it, the Las Vegas Raiders found a way to win a really bad game. They had a total of 268 yards. Hey, you got the job done. That's all that matters. I think for this Raiders team moving forward, I don't know what the issue or the solution for this team can really be because you don't have a run game. You try to run the ball with Zamir White, but he's averaging 2.9 yards a carry. Yes, you could do some end around stuff with some of your speedy guys, but that's just not sustainable. It's not consistent. It's not reliable. And you have some studs who can catch the ball, but you don't have a quarterback to get you there. If I was the Raiders, I know you won this game, but I would at least consider Aiden O'Connell at this point. And then for Cleveland, all of your issues are really noticeable. Your offensive line is putrid. Deshaun Watson is even worse. It might be time to start Jameis Jameis Winston. And then we had the blowout for Sunday Night Football, a game that on paper seemed to be like an absolute match made in heaven. You had a Ravens team that needs a victory going up against a Bills team that is red hot. And unfortunately, it just kind of came out to be a bit of a blowout. Now for Buffalo, I'm not too worried about this loss. Yes, it sucks. You got blown out to a Ravens team that's really good, but you obviously wanted this game to be more competitive and play more in your favor. But you really couldn't get anything going in that first half, and Baltimore was able to take advantage of it. And then once you got the momentum going for yourself in that second half, where you scored the touchdown, you had the 3 and out, and then all of a sudden your offense is coming out there having a chance to cut this thing down to, I think it was a 1-possession game or a 4-point game. And then you had some trickery that didn't look pretty from the beginning, and then the throw that Josh Allen tried to make, it got, I think, strip sacked, and yeah, it just wasn't your day. Let's just be honest. I think if these two teams played 10 times, I think this is probably a 5-5 split. These are two really good teams. One team, in my opinion, has a great defense in the Baltimore Ravens that really showed out against Josh Allen. But I think on a day that favors the Buffalo Bills, they probably play better offensively. So I don't think this game is all that indicative of either one of these teams. But for the Ravens, this is a really good win against a really good team when you really needed it to happen for you. Lamar Jackson played great. And man, that guy, Derrick Henry, had himself a day. He started this game off with a 70-yard rushing touchdown, ridiculous stuff. Finished the day 24 carries, almost 200 yards, and a touchdown. Shout out to Derrick Henry. That is looking like an absolute steal for the Baltimore Ravens. And again, I'm not too worried about this for the Buffalo Bills. I still think that you're clearly one of the best teams in the NFL. But that is going to conclude this video. Now, if you guys are interested to see how many picks I got right for my predictions video, this is all of my predictions. I actually had a really solid day. We'll wait to see about those 2 other games. I'll update you guys on the community tab. But if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.